Okay, this is Biodiversity 3, the third video notes. We are starting with slide 53 and going through about slide 70. So we're starting with national parks. National parks are in about 1,100 countries right now, and almost all of them are threatened by human activities. So the problem is that local people will invade the park and use the resources in the park. They'll use it for wood, they'll use it for crops, they'll use it for hunting, fishing, anything that park offers, and that is depleting the resources more than they should be. Loggers, miners, poachers are all on there as well and depleting those natural resources. A lot of the parks are really too small for large animal species. So for example, like a lion or in the U.S. a cougar needs 100 miles at least to be able to roam and hunt, and a lot of the parks are significantly bigger than that, and therefore not able to sustain those larger animal species. So that becomes a problem with them. The invasive species are becoming very bad, and we'll talk about invasive species a little bit later in this unit. So the U.S. national parks, it's not only the use of resources, it's use of the space that's becoming a problem. They're becoming so popular that it's having a negative impact just by the amount of people on them, by the sheer volume. So you can see the picture there from an ATV that's really damaging that landscape, increasing erosion, decreasing plant life, and therefore decreasing biodiversity, and all of those threaten the natural resources. Air pollution is doing the same thing, from climate change and from nearby cities, towns, anything like that. So this goes through and talks about some solutions to make national parks a better resource. A lot of it is integration of management, working on management plans, working on managing the parks, managing the people that work on them, managing the resources used from them. For sure, limiting entry and surveying more, increasing funds. All of these things, they're all kind of tied together inside the big management scheme, that if the parks are better managed, then they may be a better natural resource. Nature reserves are different from a park in that the reserves are not usually allowed to have as much human, not necessarily interference, but human impact on them. So whereas a park you may go camping on, you may go hiking, fishing, boating, any of a whole bunch of recreational activities, a nature reserve is usually very protected and much more quiet. It may have very limited human access available, and it may have no human access available. So there are some places where you can't go at all. You need to be, special permit, only scientists can go. Some places that you can go and maybe drive a boat across, but you can't go fishing. There's all different levels, but they tend to severely limit the human footprint on that land, even if it's just to do something as simple as hiking, simply because they want it to be totally undisturbed. Right now, about 12% of the land is protected, but only 5% is really enforced. And then conservation biologists are calling to say that about 20% of the land would be what's needed in order to have a representative area from each of the biomes. So if we want to talk about each of the biomes being represented from every climate, every area, every ecosystem, we need 20% of the whole terrestrial surface covered in order to do that. So we need the larger, the medium-sized reserves. Those are the ones that protect biodiversity because those allow the large predators and allow that top-down control of the ecosystem. They need to be connected through something called corridors that allow the animals to move back and forth. So if you have, protected a reserve here and a reserve here, a jaguar can't get in between these two areas if there's a whole bunch of roads and towns and everything right here. So you need to have passageways or corridors for these animals to go through in order to move between the different reserves. Costa Rica has done an excellent job of this. They've worked really hard to consolidate their parks and reserves into 8 mega reserves, and that's designed specifically to sustain the biodiversity of that country. So they're a very green-oriented country. Same diagram except bigger. There's 34 hotspots identified by ecologists throughout the world right now. There they're identified because they're important to biodiversity, and they're endangered, in danger of losing those spots from climate change, from pollution, from human encroachment, whatever the cause. These are the areas around the world that are endangered right now. The U.S. Endangered Species Act, if you're looking at the biodiversity hotspots in the U.S., as opposed to the entire world, we're seeing the hotspots definitely in California and off the coast of California, along the mountains right here. We're also seeing them along the mountains right here, and then down into some of Florida and some of Central America. Especially, and then out in Hawaii is a huge biodiversity hotspot as well. So biodiversity itself is a variety of different species. A species diversity is the number of different species and their abundance in a given area. So the difference is that biodiversity is just the number, how many species do I see? The species diversity is how many of each animal, but if I only see one, it's not quite as diverse as seeing 10 of that particular species. Genetic diversity is the genetic makeup. You guys are all comfortable with genetics, I hope, at this point. You want a large gene pool. You want a lot of genetic diversity in order to keep a species competitive in reproduction and competition between, for prey, for mates, etc., so on. So you need a large gene pool in order for that to happen. Ecosystem diversity is a number of ecosystems you see in that biome, in that area, in that country, whatever the case that you're talking about. Diversity is really important for a lot of reasons. It provides a stable environment, keeps species, healthy, and keeps competition going, so it keeps the food web very healthy and very good. It keeps the genetic diversity up, which we know we need in order to have a healthy population. It provides medicines and food for both for us and for other animals, and then it also provides materials. The wood and the plants and the any of the materials we need for building homes, the stuff that we use to make the more man-made things, the raw materials that we turn into some other things. We use in science, of course, for experimentation and new technology. From an aesthetic standpoint, it looks more beautiful when there's a high biodiversity. And then the ethical and religious dilemmas are the same as always. Although religious, in the case of biodiversity, at times can be a factor against biodiversity because religious beliefs tend to focus on a lower diversity. So extinction occurs when the population can't adapt to a changing environment. So when that population is outcompeted by another species, loses its natural habitat, loses, the climate changes, whatever the case, a drastic change occurs either instantaneously or over time, and that population can't cope with that, can't change to accept that. And if they can't change to accept that, then they're going to die. So for example, climate change has affected the Costa Rican Monteverde cloud forest very dramatically. The precipitation and the temperature has changed dramatically in that area, and the golden toad is now extinct because it couldn't handle those changes in temperature and precipitation. So if you're looking at this graph, you see a lot of mass extinction happenings where you see kind of builds and builds and builds. And then once you hit that that balancing point, it kind of switches over to a new group of animals. So for example, the one you're probably most familiar with is the dinosaurs, where you see the dinosaurs lots and lots more and more and more biodiversity until they hit that dramatic change right there, which most people think was the comet that changed the climate that caused many of them to disappear. So now we're looking at an extinction crisis that's caused for the first time by human activities. Is where that climax is going to hit unless we change something. Effects of humans on biodiversity. The general consensus is that we're decreasing biodiversity. It's as simple as that. Humans affect biodiversity. We decrease the biodiversity on the earth because we take a lot more space, we take a lot more resources, we take a lot more land, and and we have caused the climate to change. So all of those causes have in turn impacted and decided us or caused us to decrease the biodiversity. A lot of extinctions are happening because of us. And we are going to stop there.